watching NotesIn9.
Hello, and welcome to NotesIn9. I'm David Leedy. Episode 116, Data Contexts and Variable Resolvers. Today is July 2nd, 2013. I give you that date today because it's a happy birthday show, and I've got a couple of birthday wishes I do want to send out. And first and foremost is to Bruce Elgort. Bruce is my dear friend, probably my oldest friend in the my professional community in the Lotus collaboration IBM world, whatever you want to call it, and he's just a great guy. So Bruce, have a great birthday today. I wish you all the best. Also, today's birthday, I believe, is at Mikkel Hestelberg's, and I've met him a couple times. He's also a great guy. He's a super talented developer, and another person that I do want to get on the show at some point, hint, hint. And finally, Paul Withers, a belated birthday to him. I believe his birthday was a couple days ago, actually, and I've done a lot of speaking with Paul, and he's a very good friend. At least up until you see the video from today's show. Then all bets are off. But we'll talk about that later. But today's show is Paul's going to come on, and Paul is with Intech Systems in the UK, and he's an IBM champion, and he does a lot of speaking, and he contributes to OpenNTF, and he does mentoring, and he did write a little book that I showed you in the first picture. So a little book about the whole XPages thing. So what Paul's going to talk about is these data contexts and variable resolvers. And before we get into that, I just wanted to talk briefly about these Java objects as all, because you've heard a lot of stuff about managed beans in XPages, this big drive to get to managed beans. And I'm starting to realize it's not about managed beans. Okay, I believe now it's a little more just about using Java to basically make your own custom classes, again, similar to Lotus scripter. So there is a lot of power to using the Java syntax and the Java language for your core business object. But it does not all have to be quote unquote managed beans. So what managed beans means basically is you're making an addition to the faces context file and having XPages manage the creation of your Java class itself automatically, which is cool. I mean, don't get me wrong, that is cool, but that's not your only option. You can create a Java object and put it in scope and before page load, which I did many shows ago when I was playing with like hash maps and stuff like that. You'd put it in scope. Well, you can create your own object and put that in scope, and you can actually. I didn't realize this until recently. I think Jesse Gallagher told me is you can actually access that through EL as well. So now you can manually put it in scope and use it just like a bean, really. And that's the holy grail, really, or the key thing is this using expression language to automatically bind, read, and write fields to it. You can also use your Java code in data contexts. So you can create this data context on a page or on a panel. Now, on a page, it might have a few more performance issues or so. So you don't have to touch the faces config for a data context either. Okay, and then there's this new one that I've been playing with recently, which I hope to get some shows out about. Is this the data source called object data? Okay, so you can create this object data source, and kind of like point that to your Java class, and then it has create and save methods. It has a read-only method that I've never yet gotten working, but the create and save methods I have. So now you can basically use simple actions for save. You just save the data source and stuff like that, and it works. So that's kind of interesting too. So I'm really kind of getting into object data even a little more than the managed beans a little bit. So I just wanted to throw that out there for you to keep that in mind, because we do a lot of talking about this Java code, and I think managed beans, the term is just scary if you're not comfortable with it. So it's basically a Java object that you can now access in many different ways. It's so flexible, and it's so worth learning. I think some Java and getting into this for your backend logic. It really does speed up a lot of stuff I'm doing with the day job, and now the flexibility of being able to put them in scope or in data context or in object data or even the managed beans or so. It's just a very powerful tool for building your apps. Okay, so with that being said, Paul has come on with a video that I've actually been sitting on for a while because I just haven't gotten to it. and he's going to talk about variable resolvers. He's going to talk about some of these concepts, and he's going to take a little shot at me during this video. And I thought long and hard about some creative editing, and because I've sat on this video for probably about 2 months, I'm going to just let it go, and I'll deal with Paul in a future show. So you have that to look forward to. So with that being said, let's go to the demo.
My name's Paul Withers, and in this video I'm going to talk about a couple of aspects of XPages that probably aren't used as much as they could be. The first of those is data contexts, and the second is variable resolvers. And as you'll see as we go through the video, there is quite a link between the two of them. Now, I did promise David quite a while ago a video on data contexts, so I'm giving him two for the price of one here, and so I'd just like to apologise to him. So this is David, if you haven't met him, with his Enter the Dojo Ninja headband from our session at Lotusphere 2011, and his autographed copies of cheat sheets for his adoring fans. So, I've got this demo database here, and I'm just showing a date up in the top right hand corner there. So if we go to the X page, or the custom control that's doing that, then you can see that all that I've got is a div in the search bar facet, and it's just running some server-side JavaScript on page load for better performance, because the date isn't going to change during the life cycle of the page, and it's doing an at left, at text, at today, and getting the first 8 characters. So it's something fairly basic. Now that's optimized because it's using on page load, so it's optimized to a bit of a degree. It's not going to recalculate during partial refreshes and those kind of things. But what if you want to use that date elsewhere in the application? Well, you could just use the same code, copy and paste it, but then what if the user wants the date format to change, for example? Well, that's one of the areas where data contexts can come in useful. So first of all, what is a data context? Well, it's a piece of data that's bound to a specific context. Data contexts, like any data elements, can be bound to an X page, to a custom control, or to a panel. And panels actually are better performing for it. So if we just move up, then on the custom control, you can see I've already set up this data context here. So you can't actually see those on the data tab, or they show up on the data tab once you've actually created them, but you can't add a data context from that area there. You need to go to the all properties, go down to data, and then just add a data context. And then, as with any other complex property, then you can see the first one that's there. So I've called that this date. So data context, like a data element, it's got a var, which is what you refer to it by, and a value, which is the value for it. So let's just take that value from there, and we'll just move it to the value property of the data context. So how do you refer to that? Well, it's the same as you would refer to any other variable in a repeat control, or a document on the page. You bind it to a data source, and expression language is going to be the way that you refer to it. So the expression variable that you refer to it is this date, and you can see that in the source code that just wraps a hash curly brace around it. That's the usual way for it referring to expression language, and this first part there is the variable name that you want to refer to it by. When you're doing binding to fields on a form, then you reference the data source name, dot, and the field value, the variable name, and then the property within that variable. Here, because there aren't any properties of this date, we just refer to it with the variable name, hash this date. So if we save that and just build the application, then we're not going to see anything different, but we can then use that date anywhere on the page. And the other benefit of that is that that code is only going to get run once on the X page, no matter how many times that variable is referred to during the X page. So it's giving a slightly better performance. One thing to bear in mind with data contexts is something that Sven Hasselbach picked up on, which I wasn't aware of, is that data contexts get calculated more times if they're bound to the X page or the custom control than if they're bound to a panel. Here it's computed on page load, so it's only going to get calculated once, but if it was computed dynamically, so it had a hash instead of the dollar, then it would calculate a number of times. But it still has benefits, particularly if it's being used for a rendered property. So let's show that. So here I've got, I'm printing some JavaScript out and returning true. And the same there. It's just doing something very basic here. On this one, for example, which is the same kind of page, I've got a data context there called show fields that's just returning true. And on those edit boxes, I'm setting the rendered to that show fields variable. And I've got, let's just see that, because I've got something called a phase listener to allow us to actually see how often that's running during the page. So here you can see that it's printing out, it's running once on page load. If I then partially refresh, then you can see that that's running for each field twice in the apply request values, twice in process validations, twice in update model values, and then once during render response. Let's compare that to the data context. Now you can see that that's calculating once in the page load event and once in the render response. So I'm not gaining anything on page load. But let's look at the partial refresh. Then it's not running in restore view, it's running once in apply request values, 3 times for some reason in process validations, once in update model values, once in evoke application, and twice in render response. So if we just look at some of the stats for that, then you can see that with server-side JavaScript for the rendered, it's running a lot of times there. It's 15 times in the partial refresh, whereas with the data context, it's 9 times. So you're gaining with rendered. Value, as you can see there, gets calculated fewer times. So if you're using a data context for the value property, then you're not really going to get the same benefits in performance, but you are going to get benefits in reusability across the X page. I'll just point out at the end here you can see that I'm using Exec Mode. Exec Mode is something that's been around all the way through XPages, but it's been made more visible in Release 9. So on the button here, actually let me just open that particular XPage so we can see it in action. You can see that Exec Mode, on the Events tab, we've got this tick for Set Partial Execution Mode, but we can also now select the ID for it to run on. I wasn't going to cover that, but why not? So we can see that if I just do that partial refresh with a refresh ID, it's still setting the data context a lot of times. It's still setting it for both fields. But if I partially refresh with Exec Mode, then it's cutting it down significantly. That's meaning that the Exec Mode and the Exec ID is meaning that it's only running over this area in orange. It's only running over those controls when it does the server-side processing. So there's another performance gain there. So that's data contexts. What about variable resolvers? Well, we've basically seen it in action. And if I just uncomment these lines so that you can really see it in action. A variable resolver it does what it says on the tin. It's resolving a variable. So that variable could be context, it could be view scope, it could be that show fields variable that's in the data context. But it's also things like @db title, param, faces context, session scope. It's any global object. But also look, we've got that @left, @text, @today. So what we've done with one line of server-side JavaScript, which looks very performant, is actually running through variable resolver a lot of times. It's running through it for each of those pieces, each of those formulas, and calculating what the response would be, calculating what it needs to go to get the value for each of those. So @today, it'll be going to some Java function. @text, it'll be going to another Java function passing in the content of @today and the number 8. @left, it'll be going to @text will be passing in @today. @left will be going to another Java function passing in the output of that and the _8. So it's running through a lot of code. And so the variable resolver is used for every var on the XPage, every @formula, every global object, every scope, so session scope, view scope, every managed bean. They all go through that variable resolver. So just think about that for a moment. This was on that page. So that's from here. All of those print statements are where it's gone through the variable resolver. That's a lot of processing that's actually happening on the XPage. And that's on page load. That's not when we add in all the phases of the life cycle, because as we've already just seen, things get recalculated a number of times during the JSF life cycle, the XPages life cycle. There's a hell of a lot of processing that goes on in an XPage. if you weren't already aware of that, then hopefully now you're appreciating just how much is happening under the hood and just how quickly XPages runs. Because if I just partially refresh that, and let's just put something in there, that's refreshed. And that's run through lots of print statements. Back to here for that partial refresh. And those are just the print statements of going through the variable resolver. So Philippe Riond and the XPages team at IBM deserve a medal for making XPages run as quickly as it does without us realizing it. But just going back to the application layout, one of the problems with using a data context here is that value is calculated for every XPage that is loaded. As we've seen, the variable resolver is already used to convert this date to that value. You can actually use the variable resolver to just calculate the value there. So let's do that. Variable resolvers come in two parts. The first is a Java class, which is what we've got here. It extends a class called variable resolver. That's javax.faces.el.variableResolver. The usual way is that it has a private final variable resolver delegate and sets delegate to the resolver, and then at the end of the resolve variable passes up to calls the resolve variable of the delegate, which is basically it's just passing it on to the server's variable resolver. So we're using this within the NSF, and we're just escalating it up the tree to the server's variable resolver. The second part is in the faces config, and we've got it's this code here. So for the application, we define the variable resolver and just map it to this Java class. Simple as that, and it's now available within the application. So I'll just comment that out. So basically what we're doing is we're taking a string that's passed in, which is the variable name. So it's all of these: view scope, @db title, session scope. We're taking those. We're checking whether it matches something that we're checking against, and if it does, then we're returning a value. So we want to return the current date. Now obviously that's Java, so we can't use this @left, @text, @today, but to be honest, why would we, when you can Google for Java get current date as string, and even this first option here for Stack Overflow, this option, as the comment says, is going to get the date and time, not just the current date. We want this one. So we can just copy that, paste it in here, and it looks as if we've got huge errors, but we don't. This is where the Java editor is much better really than the server-side JavaScript one. It's not picking up the right classes here. Usually I seem to have a bit of a problem at the moment where it's not looking in the build path for the right classes. So I'll just need to manually add them. But usually if you right click on that on the cross, then it will tell you which classes it's guessing at to pull in. And I think that's actually java.text, I think is what I need. Yes. And is that going to, yes. Yeah, so usually you get something like this where it says import date java.util, and it solves the problem for you. Now this is doing a system.error.println, same kind of thing as a system.out.println. We just actually want to return that value. And we're using current month there, so we can get rid of that data context, and we just pass in the variable name, current month. Save our variable resolver, and we've got an error up there. Got an extra semicolon. And now if I go back to the home page, we've got the date in that full format. Now that's saved it, but that's still going to calculate it every single time. We can do better than that with no real complexity. So it's a string, and we don't want to refer to it explicitly outside of it, so we'll make it private. Let's call it current date underscore. And this is again where Java helps. We can create the getters and setters automatically. So we'll stick it after the example variable resolver bit. So it's added it in here. We'll in the get, we'll just do a check if current date underscore if null equals current date, set current date, and I don't actually want to pass a value in. I don't need to, because all that I'm going to do is cut this from here, paste it in, and set this dot current date equals that date format. So I'm basically saying I'm going to use get current date you've got the content assist there as well. So if current month is what I'm looking for, I'm going to use get current date. If that current date variable is null, then I'm going to do set current date, which will set it to the value that we've got there. And let's just add in some print statements just so we can see that it's actually performing better, that it's only calculating once. So hopefully now, unless I've got something wrong, yes, that's done it. So we can see that the first time it's going into the variable resolver for current month, it's getting the current date and setting the current date. If I then go to another page, it's just getting the month and getting the current date. That's now cached for every user across the whole application. Instead of calculating it on that computed field or once on each page, it's now cached and processing across the whole server. So it's better performing. The only thing just to bear in mind is that that resolve variable function, as we've seen, gets called for gets called for virtually everything within the system. So it's very important to kind of optimize that as much as possible. If it's badly optimized, because it gets processed a lot of times, if you've got some quite deep nested ifs in there, it's going to impact the performance. But if it's done well, if it's something that's going to be used across the whole application, then you can really improve the performance and do a lot of caching. And of course, variable resolvers, as with any other Java option, can be put into an OSGI plugin, so it's then being used across the whole server rather than just the application. So hopefully that gives you a bit more insight into data context and takes some of the scary out of those, but also shows you how that idea can be moved further on into variable resolvers, to give you an idea of, to give you some more strings to your bow and an understanding of when to use them, how to use them, and how to use them well. Thanks.
And that's the demo. I do thank Paul for coming on the show. And if you have any questions for him, you know how to get a hold of him. If you have any questions for me, here's my information. And I thank you for your time.